our hands because, you know, at the center of all of this are the 5 First Nations in the Athabasca Delta and in the Athabasca region. Fort McKay Cree Nation, Mikisew Cree Nation, Fort Prairie Chippewan First Nation, Fort McMurray First Nation, and some Métis settlements as well throughout the area. Then we've got tar sands in Peace River, we've got tar sands in Cold Lake, and about another dozen First Nations in those areas, including Beaver Lake Cree Nation, Lubicon Cree, and then we've got, you know, dozens of First Nations in British Columbia and the Lower Mainland, all around Vancouver, where they want to build another super tanker port, you know, for the Kinder Morgan expansion, in northern British Columbia, in the interior of BC, of the Yinka Dene Alliance, who recently organized the Freedom Train across across Canada. You might have seen some of the media. We all went to the Enbridge AGM in Toronto and took them on. It was a very powerful initiative. Similar, some of you, how many of you remember the Constitution Train back in the 80s? Does anybody remember that? Well, that was the inspiration for the shut down the tar sands and shut down the Enbridge Gateway Freedom Train ride that just happened a couple weeks ago. And so, you know, all of this gets down to morality. And climate change itself is a moral question, you know. All of this stuff, big oil, climate change, tar sands, it comes down fundamentally to moral questions, you know, about ourselves, about our society. And while economics, you know, are really important, and I like to talk about economics and the very real considerations we have to take around that, in Fort Chipewyan, in the last 10 years, there's been 100, more now actually, over 100 out of the 1,200 citizens of that community that have died from rare forms of cancer and other autoimmune deficiencies. And there are many more that are sick right now. And the same statistics are emerging in many of the other communities that live in the midst of the tar sands development, the other ones that I mentioned. And these impacts, these sicknesses, are emerging downstream, up the Mackenzie River, and some of the Dene communities up in Northwest Territories at this point. Now, for those of you that understand environmental toxins and the whole process of bioaccumulation, you know that the reason why First Nations people are getting sicker than most everybody else in northern Alberta is because of our connection to the land through our hunting and fishing culture. In Fort Chipewyan and every one of those First Nations communities up in northern Alberta and NWT, Northwest Territories, there's no grocery store. There is the northern, but it's about $14 for a quart of milk at the northern, or for a gallon of milk at the northern. You know, about $15 for a box of Lucky Charms, $6 for a head of cabbage that's half bad. You know, $2 an orange. But you can buy a pop for $1. You know, they put the Enfalac, the baby formula, beside the milk whitener. You know, so there's no Safeway. There's no, I don't know, Loblaws. Okay, there's no superstore. What there is, though, is nature. And so a lot of people, native people, subsidize their diets in the cash economy through continuing with subsistence practices. And that's one of the reasons why they're most at risk for these rare forms of cancer that are appearing in the population. And in Fort Chipewyan, there has been 3 confirmed cases of a rare form of bile duct cancer that science has connected to long-term exposure to polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or oil. Okay, and the typical, if you understand epidemiology, for 3 cases of this rare form of bile duct cancer to appear in a population sample of 1,200 is statistically impossible. Okay, because typically this form of cancer appears in 1 in 200,000. Okay, and now if you take that same kind of epidemiology rate, the autoimmune deficiencies, the other cancers, and this rare form of bile duct cancer, if the Athabasca River flowed through Calgary and Edmonton, and those people were exposed to the same environmental factors, you would have, you know, dozens and dozens of square blocks of people dead or dying from cancer, and it would be an international travesty. But because it's a small Native community in northern Canada, this government believes that it can sweep it under the rug, and that's why I say this is a moral question for society. As we're going through a process of reconciliation, we have to ask ourselves, is this the economy that we want? And I wanted to show you